If there's any one build that's a good place to start talking about buildcraft in Warframe, it's Speedvolt. Speedvolt is well known, it's self-explanatory, it's very focused, it does one thing very well, it's easy to put together, and it's arguably really fun. But this is not Speedvolt. Mere speed is not enough for me. Behold! Riot Walker Volt, a new coat of paint for the Buildcraft Classic. Put a windshield on that car, you'll get less bugs in your mouth that way. Yes, I'm completely serious. This playstyle is great for many types of missions, not just capture and rescue. You can run real fast and defend things and annihilate your enemies with tons of damage. It's built around Firewalker and holding Electric Shield while maintaining some of the speed that a Speedvolt would have. And since you're shooting through an Electric Shield while holding it, which means you're using a secondary weapon, I decided to focus on powering up that secondary weapon in a lot of different ways. In a moment, I'm going to talk about the builds, and after that I'll show you some more gameplay. While I'm working on a loadout, I usually like to know 3 basic things: how I'm going to avoid dying annoyingly often, any multipliers I'm providing to my weapons or damaging abilities, and the payoffs, the unique reasons to use this loadout over another. You can already get an idea which of these things is what in this case from the introduction footage, but I'll touch on them as they come up. Starting with Volt's build, a lot of what this playstyle does isn't affected by stats very much. Firewalker isn't affected by range in this context, for example. Electric Shield isn't affected by a bunch of things, but Firewalker does get better if you can cover more ground, and holding Electric Shield does make you a bit slower, so I'm going to start building a bit like a Speedvolt. So that's lots of strength, and yes, sprint speed too. It's a separate multiplier with strength to give you your final high speed with Volt's speed ability. It's better to have the best mods in both categories than just to put on all of the strength mods. And I'm certainly not going to put on all of the mods because I don't want the build only to be fast. We want other stuff as well. Some duration is nice here too, so that you won't need to recast Electric Shield too often. And the only ability really affected by range here would be Discharge, which is why I swapped it out for Firewalker in this case, so I'm dumping range altogether. Speaking of dumping, Electric Shield allows you to regenerate energy through Zenric's Energizing Dash while you're holding it. Normally you can't do that while an ability is charging you energy, but this one it works because it charges you energy not over time but over the distance you travel, you'll notice in the tooltip. So we'll come back to that, but for now we're dumping efficiency too. The survivability I'm looking for will mostly come from Electric Shield and Firewalker. Electric Shield blocks just about all attacks from the front, Firewalker sets enemies behind you on fire so they can't shoot you in the back. But I do want a bit of a backup plan, so I'm going to add Quick Thinking. Quick Thinking is useful here because Volt has a nice energy pool, and you're also not spending it. This loadout doesn't really have ways to use excess energy, so it's often going to be sitting full. You'll have a full tank of gas to use as a buffer. I think something like Rolling Guard would be fine here too. You just want something for situations where it's awkward to block all incoming fire. You can't simply keep moving. There are some close quarters situations that you'll encounter where you do want to just not die to a stiff breeze. For Arcanes, I don't need survivability or anything like Arcane Energize, so I'm going to bring 2 secondary Arcanes. Those are Arcane Precision, so that's base damage for secondary weapons, and Arcane Velocity, which is fire rate for secondary weapons. What you'll notice about these is that they're huge values. There's a base damage Arcane for every category of weapon, but this one has a way larger value for some reason. The fire rate Arcane, the same thing. It's a lot more fire rate than similar Arcanes, so that's a really good fit for Volt. The reason that those Arcane slots are free is because Volt doesn't need the survivability when played this way, since Electric Shield and Firewalker to a lesser extent are taking care of it, which means you have the space, and what weapon are you holding while holding the Electric Shield that gives you the free Arcane space? A secondary, which benefits a lot from the free Arcane space, which is very nice. So on top of that, you can add Shock Trooper. This is one of the options for these remaining slots that fits really well. There's already a lot of duration. This ability has very high base duration, and a lot of strength. This scales with strength. So this is going to give a ton of elemental damage that will match up very nicely with Arcane Precision's base damage. The other thing about Shock Trooper, of course, is its elemental damage and its electricity damage that adds like a mod on your secondary weapon. So you can kind of save a mod slot by making, say, Corrosive by running only a Toxin mod, and then this will add electricity and they'll combine to make make corrosive. That's very nice. So depending on the weapon, that could save a mod slot. That'd be really nice. At the worst, it's just a lot more damage, which will multiply with another source of bonus damage that's already on the loadout. So that's something I'll keep in mind when modding the secondary weapon. For the remaining slots, there are more good augments. Pyroclastic Flow will build up damage very effectively since this build can move around so fast. Many enemies could be on fire at once. You don't really want to melee attack with this playstyle since it'll result in enemies surrounding you, that is, not being in front of or behind you, which will probably get you killed. Instead, when enemies are a little too close for shooting to feel practical, you can kick Pyroclastic Flow's stored damage into them. And Transistor Shield is also pretty good. Ignore the bit about allies picking up your shields. The main thing is that extra damage. If you get shot at very rapidly and shoot back very rapidly, this can end up doing a ton of damage. The damage is stored in Volt's passive, so you want to attack fast to make sure it doesn't stay capped at 1,000 damage for too long. You want to rapidly fill that up by taking fire and empty it out by shooting back quickly. It isn't worth it except against higher level enemies, but you don't need help against lower level enemies, so I recommend it. So this is the final version of the loadout that I'm going to show you, and you'll notice I added some efficiency and ranked down Blind Rage for some more efficiency. I did that because when you actually play this build, it turns out that you can't dump efficiency, you do need a bit more. This moves pretty fast, and so that's why the drain from Electric Shield gets so out of hand. Jacking up that distance per energy ratio that's affected by efficiency, jacking that up actually is pretty important, and I found that it was better to just sacrifice the one mod slot, sacrifice a little strength to do it. I just don't think that makes a big difference. Transistor Shield is a good augment mod, but it's just damage, and you'll see, you really do not need damage. You could do something else. You could sacrifice the Aura slot for, I guess, Energy Siphon, and an Arcane slot for Arcane Energize, and the Sentinel for Death Cube. I don't think you should do that. I just don't think it's better than the marginal limited cost of sacrificing one mod slot. I just don't think that's a big deal, but it's something you could try. I'm not going to, and that's why. So alright, we got the build. There's a lot of multipliers on here. It's time for that second point I mentioned before. This is what I've got. A moderate amount of reload speed from Speed, a ton of elemental damage from Shock Trooper, also its electricity damage, a ton of base damage from Arcane Precision, but only for secondaries, significant secondary attack speed from Arcane Velocity, and critical damage. That's not listed on the tooltip, but it's from Electric Shield. Electric Shield also gives some elemental damage, but it's electricity damage, but it's separate from your mods. It doesn't combine like a mod. That's confusing, and it's not affected by strength, so it doesn't really matter. But anyway, technically you get that as well. The point is, in this case, you basically have every single multiplier. Like, besides multi-shot, you're adding base damage, elemental damage, some crit damage, some fire rate, essentially all the multipliers. And so it's not going to necessitate or ask you to build your secondary weapon very differently to get the most damage, because it's just more of all kinds of damage. Like, every type of damage, it's more. Again, except multi-shot, but that doesn't really matter. So it's going to be the usual little bit of everything build for the secondary. I chose Dubba Stubba, or Kuva Twin Stubbas for the wiki, because it has all of the qualities I'm looking for in a weapon for this loadout. So here it was more useful to narrow down my options. I wanted a weapon that has a good magazine size to support the fire rate I'm going to be giving it. I guess also it might as well be an automatic weapon. The reload can be kind of mediocre because I'll speed it up because of speed. If necessary, I can free up a mod slot because I'm adding an elemental damage type from outside the weapon build. Personally, I wanted a fairly accurate weapon as well. It's easy to keep enemies in front of you if they're far away from you. And since I have outside electricity damage, I'm probably building corrosive. That's not very restrictive on a secondary weapon, but worth keeping in mind. Fortunately, my Dubba Stubba already had toxin damage, so that's a perfect fit. A few other weapons are a good fit as well. I just really like this one. Again, you're looking for a mostly standard build here because although Volt is going to provide a lot of different multipliers, almost all of them are accounted for. But there are a few things you can do. You can add hydraulic crosshairs to make the critical damage from Electric Shield more consistent. I like to use steady hands. I think it makes a big difference on high fire rate weapons like this one. And this is also where you should recall Shock Trooper's electricity damage buff. That works just like a vanilla elemental mod on your weapon builds, so if you bring only a toxin elemental mod, you'll end up with corrosive when you add Shock Trooper. It works just like adding vanilla element, and you end up with corrosive. If you're using a Kuvalich weapon like this one, you could even run no elemental mods on your build and just use innate toxin from your Lich, and you'll still get corrosive. The thing to watch out for is if you have an innate element that isn't Toxin or Electricity, because then you'll need to mod for Toxin and Electricity to make sure the extra element is the one left hanging. If you then use Shock Trooper, the Electricity will lock onto the Electricity you already have combined in, and it will form more corrosive, and you'll have your, heat or whatever as the leftover element, but that doesn't save you a mod slot, so it's a little worse. In this particular case, I really just don't need the extra mod space, so I'll just add in some status chance. But it would be nice to have a weapon that really wanted the mod space for, say, an augment or similarly a syndicate mod. This would be a great place to use something like that. If you're into Rivens, this would also be a great place for a multi-shot Riven, since that's the only multiplier that's missing, really. With that, that's the core of this loadout, but I've got plenty of free space for more. We haven't talked about primary weapon, melee weapon, heavy weapon, companion. So yeah, for melee weapons, I don't want to melee. Me personally, I'm not going to melee with this loadout at all, so I'm going to bring Karis the Prime. It gives you 10% passive speed just having it in your loadout. You could try a Gunblade. I don't think that would benefit you in a different way than shooting your secondary would. One thing I was thinking about was using Exodia Contagion projectiles, but that wouldn't really have any advantages over shooting enemies either. You can get more speed with Dispatch Overdrive if you want. I don't really think this is completely necessary, but if you want to play more in the direction of a Speed Volt, you could use this as well. A really good way to weave a heavy attack into your speedening is when jumping. So you can do a heavy slam attack to quickly move through the air, and that counts for Dispatch Overdrive as well. So that's a nice way to trigger that. So you've seen it by now. I'm going to recommend the Mutilus Quana, and yeah, it's pretty bad. Listen, here's why. Your primary can't be used while holding Electric Shield, so to me that says it's utility time. And the Mutilus Quana is a rifle for Amalgam Serration, and you're barely ever going to shoot it anyway. That's, no, I'm just kidding. This is actually useful for something. This sort of. You can combine the alternate fire, which fires that little bubble, and Electric Shield for 2 different bonuses to shots fired through them. There's a whole bunch of weird mechanics there. The orb gives critical damage, but that doesn't stack with Electric Shield's critical damage, for example. None of that stuff matters. The important thing is that firing through the orb gives you flat critical chance, and that does work with Electric Shield. You'll get noticeably more crits when firing through it. You can stack orbs for some more unnecessarily complicated benefits, but I don't think you should spend time doing that. The only reason you'd pull this out anyway would be if you weren't going to move with Electric Shield, and in the rare event that you've chosen this loadout and you're in that situation, this can increase your Dubba Stubba damage to insane heights. Why not? You could try playing around with this augment too if you like. I don't think it's that powerful most of the time, but I also think you might as well just equip it. Building this weapon for damage isn't going to accomplish very much. It hardly ever makes sense to shoot your primary while using this loadout anyway, so almost all primary weapons add nothing to this loadout. In this situation, even a small benefit, even something as small as this, does make a primary a relatively good choice. It's almost useless, but it's not literally completely useless where everything else is. In short, I'm not really recommending using this as a gun that much, but it does give you something to do if you're standing around, which you sometimes will be. I'll get more into it later. For a companion, I recommend Worm, just to knock enemies away from you in case they surround you and would shoot you and kill you. You can also bring Negate, that's sometimes useful. A few of the very few things that go through Electric Shield are things that inflict status effects on you, like fires and toxin clouds, so that's nice. This is not a very interesting loadout for companions. You don't really want to bring a beast companion because they'll get very little survivability from link health and such, due to this Volt build's unconventional survivability, like it's not based with health. On the topic of something not being a very interesting loadout slot to choose from, yeah, I'm just going to use Death Machine Rifle to add damage to enemies in this loadout. If you pile on that damage, it does become noticeable. There's no science to building the Death Machine Rifle. You just put on the multipliers there are. It's got bad crit and bad status, so it's just base damage, multi-shot, and fire rate, and elemental damage, and a Riven. You really want multi-shot and base damage on the Riven. Finally, the heavy weapon is the Grattler, and this is where I get to start talking about those payoffs. Why on earth the Grattler, you might ask? Well, this is the build, and I'll show you. A few quick notes. The way I'm going to be using it, you don't want to aim down sights, so critical focus would be good. That's why I'm not using it. Deadly efficiency is okay. You're going to empty the magazine pretty fast when using it the way I have in mind, so that's some base damage, and then just all the damage. The way you're using it is pretty much just damage. The thing to know is that while this is affected by Electric Shield, it isn't affected by Shock Trooper. And remember, a lot of the bonuses that this loadout has were for secondaries, so keep in mind that this won't get quite so many bonuses. There's no better place to start talking about gameplay with this loadout than the Boomdozer Technique. Melee attacking is for people who can't negate self-stagger. Look at this. I'm not even going to explain why this is awesome. Look at Volt's posture while doing this. Just totally relaxed. Like, this is the normal way to kill enemies. What are you laughing about? Every time I see this, it reminds me of a lawnmower or like a chainsaw, some heavy gardening tool, like maybe a weed whacker. It turns out that staggering effects don't pass through Volt's electric shield. If a bombard rocket hits you, no stagger. That works with self-stagger. So you can use the Grappler to repeatedly fire explosives at your feet, but just past your electric shield, and they won't stagger you. So again, as long as they explode on the other side of your electric shield, even if only by a tiny bit, they won't stagger you. That's what's happening here. Yeah, by the way, don't run too fast while doing this or it won't work. The main benefit of boomdozing is that you can call yourself a boomdozer. No, that you could deal the damage bonus from your electric shield to all enemies around you. By the way, for goodness sakes, make your energy color solid black on the Grappler so you don't absolutely blind yourself. What you're seeing, this is solid black on both of the energy colors. It's still kind of blinding, so yeah, make it solid black. Next, I thought I would take a minute for a more serious topic, which is, of course, why not add even more speed to the loadout? You might be asking, well, isn't that something Volt is uniquely good at? Isn't that squandering Volt's potential? I don't think so. There are frames that are faster, arguably by cheating, but they're faster nonetheless. And as I'm running around, you'll notice how Volt, you have to accelerate to run by running straight for a while to your top speed, and you can really only maintain that while running straight, I was gonna say. And then think about this top speed like in normal Warframe missions, you know? At that clip at the beginning of the video, that might have looked okay. I didn't crash into stuff too much, but I took 5 takes, you know? It's not easy to control that amount of speed. If you can even attain that level of speed, and avoid losing your momentum when you have to make a sharp turn is my point. If you can do that, go for it. But I think you lose relatively little by using only speed and not infested mobility. And also, I think you could just drop some speed from this loadout. Sacrilegious, I know. But honestly, I do think I would remove a little speed from this loadout. Having a top speed that's really high can sometimes also just sort of accidentally drain a bunch of your energy from electric shield carrying. So that's a thing as well. It's not the end of the world, but still. Speaking of draining all of your energy accidentally, about that survivability with quick thinking thing. So electric shield is really good with quick thinking in a certain situation. If you get staggered by quick thinking taking a lot of damage, you can move your electric shield even while staggered or stunned in some way. You can move your reticle around and the electric shield follows it. So even if Volt isn't moving, the electric shield still can. That means that you can block follow-up staggers from an enemy that's just laying into you, so you won't get stun locked and die. So that is one nice thing about quick thinking, all the more reason to not spend all your energy running really, really, really fast for essentially no benefit. And then speaking of essentially no benefit, a bit about the Mutalist Quanta. The bubble does block bullets. So I didn't get into this when I was first talking about it because these things are so marginal. This stuff doesn't matter, but I'm still going to tell you about it because it is very amusing, and there's a sort of artful way in which the bubble serves as kind of a backup for a lot of aspects of the build. So if you run out of energy, the bubble does block bullets. If your energy was drained, you could attempt to use that as like a makeshift electric shield defensively. Probably don't try to do that too much, but you technically can do it. And then technically the bubble also gives you electricity damage. This is real. It's basically electric shield. Like the bubble is literally just electric shield, but it also gives you flat critical chance. So you can also technically use it as a backup shock trooper. So if you run out of all of your energy and then you only have toxin modded onto your secondary and you need to kill armored enemies, you can deploy the bubble, shoot through it, and you'll get back your corrosive. So I mean, should you go out of your way to do that? Is that ever going to come up? Like, that will probably literally never come up. But there you go. Also, purely hypothetically, you understand, if you do try to use the Mutalist Quanta as a gun, make sure to put critical damage but not critical chance on it. The orb will boost the critical chance to be significant, but that isn't affected by critical chance spawns. You want all the crit damage you can get. Yeah, again, don't, that's not good, don't do that, but I don't know. Between you and me, I've got a build on that. My Mutalist Quanta has a build on it. I never use it, but okay, sure, I get it. It's a completionism thing, fair enough. On paper, the Mutalist Quanta does actually have multipliers, because you have the crit, you can do the status. The way it fires is kind of weird, but it has the multipliers. Having different damage multipliers, that puts you in a good place. You wanna know what else has a lot of separate multipliers? This fashion frame. Asymmetrical fashion using the Volt Proto Skin, Mesa Noble, and a mix of the prime and non-prime Volt shoulder armors. And it's also two metallics, so it's that metal paired with some gold. Now, the Syandana also has two metallics, and one of them is kind of hidden that it isn't always metallic. Sometimes you get these channels where part of it's metallic and part of it isn't, and really the only way to deal with them is to do grayscale. That just does a good job of hiding that a metallic color channel isn't metallic everywhere. It just doesn't look out of place. It kind of looks like it's the same color as other parts of Volt, and then the metallic is just matching the metallic, but actually it's the same color channel because nothing is easy, but you can deal with it by doing such a thing. So the energy colors on Volt, when I decided that I was going to do Firewalker on Volt, I knew I wanted 3 color fire trails, or 3 colors when you were running around, because you were going to be looking at that a lot. So this is 2 colors for the energy, and then the emissive, I kind of like having the emissive be a different color from the energy, and then it shows up again in the ephemera color down here. Then I wanted the sparks to be a bit orange. I tried Blazing Step and the Eidolon ephemera with Firewalker. I didn't really like how those looked, so I went with the Zappy Boy. I really like Shocking Step ephemera with this color, because these 2 colors show up in the sort of ambient lightning effects that you're seeing around Volt a little bit, and so you actually get all 3 colors of lightning. It really looks like there are 3 different energy colors when you run. You've been seeing that. So I really like that. I'm a nerd about that kind of stuff too. I just like to make it look like somehow there are 3 energy colors. That's fun to me. So for the attachments, it's all the asymmetry. I think oftentimes to make this aesthetic work, you have to commit to it. There's a bit more use of the metallic channel that isn't always a metallic, being grayscale. You can see that on the chest piece. So there's some metallic, silvery, and then gold. But then here on the Strynx leg plate, there's no metallic metal color. It's just the gold. There's only 1 metallic, and it doesn't look out of place. It just looks like that's the normal color. Again, you see 2 metallics here on the spur, the Pakal leg guard, and then on the other pieces there's no metallics. These follow Volt's colors, so that's confusing, but then again, these allow you to sort of create the illusion that it's all the same, and this one just doesn't have that metallic. It's not that it's secretly not a metallic. It just doesn't look jarring because the color isn't a metallic. It's gray. Oh, also, so the energy color, this energy color might look like kind of weird and wonky. It's this color, and the base color is kind of indigo. It's actually like a very dark bluish purple. So I think it looks like lightning in Volt's ambient effects, which looks cool. And then it looks like a sort of tire fire when you're running around in Firewalker. I think it adds depth to the flames without making your vapor trails look like rainbow sick. Sometimes if you do 3 colors like that and they're really distinct, like I had purple for a little while and it just looked like rainbows, like it looked like a total meme. Between you and me, I kind of dislike Volt's normal appearance. I know a lot of people dislike this proto skin, but I think I dislike default Volt and Volt Prime even more. Like, even if you aren't into asymmetrical fashion or Digital Extreme's previous game Dark Sector, you've got to admit this looks pretty alright, yeah? It's its own thing. Also, since I use fashion to distinguish between builds for this series, it's quite convenient for me that there's this skin that looks completely different from normal Volt. That was the fashion, and you've been watching Riot Walker Volt. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you on the other side.